In today's video, I'm going to show you how I paint this lovely rose using just 3 colors. I'll be using a set of primaries, including Holbein Gamboge Nova for a warm yellow, Daniel Smith Ultramarine Blue, which is a warm blue, and Daniel Smith Quinacridone Rose, a cool red. I just have one brush today. This is a Da Vinci Casaneo size 6 round brush. I have a mechanical pencil, a water jar, and a rag for blotting and controlling my water. I'll be using 100% cotton watercolor paper and some Blick artist tape to create pretty borders around my composition. By the way, I'll include a link to my reference photo in the description below. You can download it from Pixabay. I start with this sketch, and I'm just getting the general proportions and size of the rose with very light pencil marks. I use a kneaded eraser to erase any excess pencil lines, and then I start to go in and add more detailed outlines of the petals. You'll notice I tried to get the angle of the rose as it's kind of tilting sideways, and I want to leave the top of the rose a little bit more blurry in my watercolor painting, sort of like what you see in the reference image, to give it that depth of field. I sketch on the major shapes like these curved petals, doing my best to compare each shape to every other shape. Really, drawing is not about seeing an inventory, it's about seeing shapes. So I see angles and lines and compare them one to another, and I really don't think about the fact that I'm actually sketching a rose. This makes it so much easier if you're thinking abstractly about each shape. So there's the finished sketch. I'm also going to use some drawing gum. This is a Pebeo drawing gum and a rubber brush. You can pick these up at Hobby Lobby or any craft store. And I'm just going to carefully apply some masking fluid to some of the light tipped edges of the rose. This will allow me to paint really freely and loosely around the white areas of the rose without having to avoid them or negative paint around them. That can be tricky and can slow you down. So masking fluid is a really fantastic tool for protecting the white areas of your paper. Once that's completely dry, usually about 10 minutes later, I'm going to start with my wet on wet technique. I use my spray bottle to apply some water directly to the paper, and then my brush to spread it out more evenly. I'm going for a glossy or satiny sheen on my paper without any excess puddling. I then mix up some ultramarine blue in a milky paint consistency and apply that everywhere I see cool color temperatures in the reference image. That includes these petals at the bottom and all around the background. I also drop it in to some of the petals in the center of the flower where you can see more of a blue tint to some of those petals. Now for my warm tones, I'm mixing up Gamboge Nova, and this is while the paper is still glossy wet, as you can see. Make sure to rinse your brush in between paint colors. I'm now applying this loosely across the center of the flower where the most concentrated yellows are located. If it looks dark to you, remember that, especially when you're using the wet and wet technique, it will dry much lighter. So oftentimes when you put down your paint, if it looks just right while it's wet, chances are it's going to dry too light. So go a little bit darker than you think you need to. Next, I'm mixing in some Quinacridone Rose with my Gamboge Nova to create an orange, and I'm dabbing this into the center of the flower to intensify that peach tone. I want it to look like it's almost glowing from within, so I try to retain the brightest colors that I can. You'll notice you can achieve a lot with just a single brush. I have not switched brushes at all. I'm going to use the same one for the entire project. And a size 6 is really versatile for a smaller image like this. As I begin to darken the values in the center of the flower, I simply use thicker paint. The creamier your paint, the less it will flow on the wet surface, and the darker and more vibrant colors you'll achieve on your surface. If you want to have a lighter value, but you accidentally covered up a section, you can use a lifting technique by taking your clean, damp brush and gently lifting the paints back out. Now I'm going to darken the background one more time, once again using ultramarine blue. You can see some of those petals are still damp, so it's creating a soft edge around the flower petals. You'll want to work more carefully if you wish to create a hard edge around any of the petals. And here at the top where I wanted to achieve a soft edge, I'm re-wetting the flower and then painting the blue right up to my pencil lines. This is going to create that fuzzed out effect. If you want to achieve the look of depth in a painting and the illusion of something turning away in space, you'll want to use soft edges, and this is where the wet and wet technique is really effective. By the way, if you feel like this project is moving just a little bit too fast, good news, it's available in real time. Just head over to watercolormastery.com where you can become a member of my online school. This project and so many others are included in the membership. We even have something called daily challenges where every single weekday you can paint something new for an entire calendar year. There's a link in the description if you'd like to learn more. All right, let's get back to the video. Once that's completely dry, we can remove our masking fluid. I prefer to use clean, dry fingers over an eraser or paper towel just because I can feel any areas where I've applied the masking fluid. Mixing up some more watery ultramarine blue, I'm going to slightly darken the petals on the bottom. We're now working with glazes. Glazes are simply layers of paint applied wet and dry, and they serve two purposes. You can use glazes to darken an area. You can also use them to adjust the color. Because we're working with transparent paints, you must take into account the colors underneath what you're painting. So for example, when you glaze blue over yellow, you're going to get a subtle green like you see here. Now I'm creating some gentle texture on each flower petal. Most of the time you'll see some subtle striations in leaves and flower petals, and that's what I'm trying to achieve right here with these subtle little brush strokes. Subtlety is key when you're working with a white subject or anything that's light in value. You want to slowly work your way light to dark. It's a lot easier to go darker than it is to remove paint. Here I'm intensifying some of the oranges and yellows in the center of the flower, and each of these little intentional brush strokes is also helping carve out the hard edges of the white petal tips that are touching the light, separating those from the shadows in between. And this is creating a sense of depth. Even though the sketch was done at the very beginning, you'll find that you're often still rather drawing with your brush by darkening values and carving out shapes with your brush tip. I'm using a little bit more ultramarine blue at the base of each of those sunlit petal tips. This is helping them appear more turned in space. I don't want them to just look like flat cutouts. To give the illusion of curvature, you must have a light, a midtone, and a dark. If you want your watercolor paintings to look the most luminous, make sure you're using a combination of both warm and cool color temperatures in your painting. You can even play these up, especially if you're having a hard time seeing them. You can take your image in a photo editing software and intensify the saturation. Sometimes this can help you really see where your warm tones are versus your cool tones, and then play that up in your painting. Here I'm continuing to add shadow tones under those petals. This is helping the petals that are in the light feel like they're popping forward in space. You want your areas of most contrast to be the areas that draw the eye in or are the focal point in your painting. You can also flip your painting upside down, check it from different angles to see that there's nothing too distracting from your focal point. Again, it's super helpful to think about painting more abstractly in terms of shapes, colors, and values rather than, oh, this is a rose that I'm painting. I find it very unhelpful to think about the subject I'm actually painting. It's useful in terms of language, but not necessarily in terms of creating a good work of art. So we're just doing some final touch-ups to the petals here. Again, to achieve the look of a petal turning in space, you can see I've left a tiny sliver of light on the petal, but now on the very edge, I'm applying a thin layer of ultramarine mixed with a hint of the yellow. Now to achieve a more neutral gray, you can use a nice combination of all three of your primary colors. I decide to mix in a little more quinacridone rose and ultramarine for a soft purple, and I'm using this to add a mid-tone shadow around some of these little petals, helping them again stand out some more and using a nice variety of cool versus warm color temperature. The petal on the bottom here I feel like needs a more neutral shadow, so the purple works well for this. At this point, I think it's helpful to step back from your painting and assess where you need to go darker. I think it's time for the background, and this will help me decide if I need to go darker anywhere else in the flower. To achieve a beautiful green, I mix ultramarine and gamboge nova, and I'd like to pre-wet the paper for some soft edges again around the top of the flower before applying my creamy paint. Here I'm adding the green and still leaving some of that blue shining through. In areas that are more dry on the paper, you can see hard edges form, and where you've pre-wet the paper, you're going to get some beautiful soft fuzzy blends. Now to create an almost black, just combine all three of your primaries in a really thick consistency, and you'll see you can get a really beautiful dark color. Depending on what ratio you use of the colors, this is something you can play with. You should be able to get an almost perfectly neutral black, or it can lean a little bit more purple or a little more red depending on your mix. So just keep carving out some lovely background shapes. I'm only loosely following my reference photo at this point. I really don't even need it anymore. It's actually more beneficial to just look at your painting and see which shapes contribute to the overall success of your painting. If any areas are distracting, you can knock those down or change them. I want to create this look of stems, so I'm adding some subtle little straight brush strokes suggesting that. And now that I have a dark background, I can see if there are any areas I need to go just a little darker in the flower itself. Sometimes it's helpful to have a really dark in there so you can check your midtones and see, okay, I need to go darker here or there. Here I'm adding a couple more little stems, and that's it. You can remove your tape, revealing your beautiful straight borders, and there is our finished rose painting. I hope you enjoyed this project. I had a lot of fun with it. It's really incredible, the power of just 3 colors. Thanks for watching today, and I'll see you soon.